Today we're breaking down an update that is already catching a lot of seniors off guard across the United States. The newly released Social Security payment chart for 2026 is now official, and for many people, the numbers don't line up with what they were expecting at all. If you rely on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits to get through each month, this update has the potential to affect your household budget, your retirement plans, and even the choices you make day to day. That's why it's so important to understand what changed, what the new chart actually shows, and how this impacts you in real terms, not just on paper. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. When you think about these changes, what part of your budget worries you the most right now? Is it groceries, rent, medical costs, utilities, or something else entirely? Take a moment and leave a comment. Reading what people across the country are dealing with helps put these numbers into real-life perspective. Every year, the Social Security Administration adjusts benefit amounts using something called the Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA. The purpose of COLA is to help benefits keep up with inflation, at least in theory. When prices go up, benefits are supposed to follow. But for 2026, the outcome turned out to be very different from what many seniors were expecting earlier this year. After months of predictions and speculation, the final COLA increase came in lower than anticipated. Inflation has slowed compared to 2025, and that slowdown directly reduced the size of the adjustment. The problem is that even though inflation has cooled on paper, the prices seniors actually pay every day haven't come down in a meaningful way. Groceries are still expensive. Rent is still high. Utility bills haven't dropped. Prescription drugs and medical services continue to rise. So while the government says inflation is easing, many retirees don't feel that relief at all. And that gap between official inflation numbers and real-life costs is at the heart of why so many people are frustrated with this new chart. Earlier in the year, many experts were projecting a COLA increase closer to 3%. Instead, the finalized adjustment is closer to 2%. That 1% difference might not sound like much, but when you're living on a fixed income, it matters. Over the course of a year, that smaller increase can mean hundreds of dollars less than what you were budgeting for. For seniors already stretching every dollar, that shortfall adds pressure month after month. The updated Social Security payment chart now reflects these revised figures, and these are the numbers millions of beneficiaries will see as we head into 2026. On the surface, most people will still see a slight increase. But when you look closer, many are realizing that the increase is far smaller than expected and, in some cases, barely noticeable once other costs are factored in. To understand why this feels so disappointing, it helps to look at how Social Security payments are calculated. Your benefit amount is based on your lifetime earnings, the age at which you claim benefits, and the type of benefit you receive. The new chart takes all of that into account and applies the updated COLA to recalculate base benefit amounts. For example, someone receiving about $1,800 per month in 2025 might now see their benefit increase to around $1,836 in 2026. Technically, that's a raise. But now think about what that extra $36 actually covers. It might pay for part of a grocery trip, or maybe one prescription copay, or a portion of a utility bill. It doesn't go very far. And when prices for basic necessities are rising faster than benefits, many seniors feel like they're falling behind even though the chart says they're getting more. This is where expectations collide with reality. On paper, benefits are increasing. In real life, many seniors feel like their purchasing power is shrinking. That disconnect is one of the biggest reasons this 2026 chart has caused so much concern. Another important piece of the puzzle is taxes. Many retirees are surprised to learn that Social Security benefits can be taxed depending on your total income. If you receive income from a pension, part-time work, investments, or savings withdrawals, a portion of your Social Security benefits may be subject to federal taxes. The new payment chart includes more detailed income ranges that help explain how taxes can reduce what you actually take home each month. This is why some people see their gross benefit increase but notice that their deposit doesn't change much at all. In some cases, it might even be slightly lower than expected. Taxes quietly chip away at the increase, leaving seniors confused and frustrated. SSI recipients are experiencing a similar situation. For millions of low-income seniors and individuals with disabilities, supplemental security income is a critical lifeline. The maximum federal SSI benefit was adjusted for 2026, but once again, the increase is modest. Because SSI uses the same COLA formula, a smaller COLA means a smaller increase. Many recipients were hoping for a more noticeable boost to help with rising rent and medical expenses, but this year's adjustment will likely feel underwhelming. For SSDI beneficiaries, the story follows the same pattern. Disability benefits receive the same COLA percentage increase, but the actual dollar amount depends on each person's work history before becoming disabled. The updated SSDI chart shows new average payments based on the 2% adjustment. One small positive change is that earnings limits for new applicants have increased slightly, allowing people to earn a bit more while still qualifying. But for those already receiving benefits, the increase may still feel very limited. Veterans receiving VA disability benefits are also affected by this update. VA payments are tied to the same cost of living adjustment used by Social Security. When Social Security increases by a certain percentage, VA benefits follow that same percentage. The new VA payment chart confirms this, meaning veterans will see the same adjustment starting in January 2026. Where confusion really starts to set in is when seniors compare what they expected to receive with what actually shows up in their bank account. One of the biggest reasons for this gap is Medicare. For most beneficiaries, Medicare Part B premiums are automatically deducted from Social Security checks, and those premiums are increasing again. So even if your gross benefit goes up, your net payment, the amount you actually receive, might stay the same or even go down. Here's a simple example. If your Social Security benefit increases by $36 per month, but your Medicare premium goes up by $30, your real increase is only $6. That's barely enough to notice. For many seniors, this is exactly what's happening. The increase looks fine on paper, but it disappears almost immediately due to higher Medicare costs. At this point in the video, if this breakdown is helpful so far, take a second and tap the like button. It really helps this information reach more people who rely on these benefits and need clear explanations. The payment schedule itself hasn't changed. Social Security benefits are still paid based on your birth date, with payments going out on the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Wednesday of each month. SSI payments continue to arrive on the 1st of the month unless that date falls on a weekend or holiday. The updated chart lays this out clearly so beneficiaries can plan their monthly budgets more accurately. Another change worth paying attention to is the earnings limit for people who are working while receiving benefits. For those under full retirement age, there is a cap on how much you can earn before benefits are temporarily reduced. That limit has increased slightly for 2026, giving working retirees a bit more flexibility to supplement their income without immediately losing part of their benefit. Full retirement age itself hasn't changed, but the new chart reinforces how early claiming permanently reduces your monthly payment. Side-by-side comparisons show how much more you receive by waiting until full retirement age or even age 70. Delayed retirement credits continue to grow at 8% per year after full retirement age, which can make a meaningful difference over time. The updated Social Security chart also places renewed attention on spousal and survivor benefits, which are a major source of income for millions of households. Widows, widowers, and divorced spouses who qualify under Social Security rules will see the same COLA adjustment apply to their benefits. However, the final amount depends on what the original worker was receiving before they passed away or before the divorce. This is why two people who appear to be in similar situations can end up with very different benefit amounts. Understanding how these calculations work is essential, especially for seniors who rely on a single check to cover all of their monthly expenses. For married couples, the new chart highlights the ongoing importance of coordination when it comes to claiming benefits. Many couples don't realize how much timing matters. One spouse might benefit from claiming earlier due to health or financial needs, while the other may be better off delaying benefits to maximize long-term income. The updated figures make it easier to compare those scenarios side by side. For some couples, waiting can mean thousands of dollars more over the course of retirement. For others, claiming earlier is a necessity. The chart doesn't make the decision for you, but it does make the trade-offs much clearer. Another critical area covered in the new chart is taxation. The income thresholds that determine whether your Social Security benefits are taxable have not changed significantly for 2026. That means many retirees will continue to owe federal taxes on a portion of their benefits if their combined income exceeds certain limits. Combined income includes your adjusted gross income, any non-taxable interest, and half of your Social Security benefits. This catches many people off guard, especially those who start drawing from retirement savings or take on part-time work to make ends meet. Because these thresholds haven't kept pace with inflation, more seniors are finding themselves subject to taxes on benefits than in the past. Even a modest increase in benefits can push someone just over the line. When that happens, part of the increase is effectively given back in taxes. This is another reason why the amount you expect to receive doesn't always match what you actually get. Medicare continues to play a major role in shaping net benefits. Part B premiums are income-based, meaning higher-income retirees pay more. The updated chart outlines the different premium brackets and shows how these deductions affect take-home payments. For many seniors, especially those living on moderate incomes, Medicare premium increases absorb most of the COLA adjustment. This pattern has become increasingly common in recent years, and 2026 is no exception. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, the new chart tells a deeper story about the long-term health of the Social Security system. While average benefit amounts have increased over time, the real purchasing power of those benefits has barely improved once inflation is taken into account. In some years, it has actually declined. This is why so many advocacy groups continue to push for changes in how the cost of living adjustment is calculated. Currently, COLA is based on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, known as CPIW. But seniors don't spend their money the same way working-age households do. Older Americans spend a much larger share of their income on healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, and utilities. These expenses tend to rise faster than general inflation. As a result, even when inflation slows, seniors may still feel financial pressure because their biggest costs aren't fully captured by the formula. This debate over the COLA formula has been ongoing for years, and while it hasn't changed yet, the growing frustration reflected in the 2026 chart is keeping the conversation alive. Many seniors feel that the system doesn't reflect their reality, and this year's modest increase only reinforces that feeling. As the 2026 changes take effect, the Social Security Administration will send updated benefit notices to recipients. These notices show your new gross benefit, any deductions, and your net payment. It's extremely important to review this information carefully. Check that your personal details are correct and that the calculations match your situation. While errors are uncommon, they do happen, especially if you've had recent changes in income, marital status, or Medicare coverage. If anything looks off, contacting the Social Security Administration directly is the best course of action. Waiting too long can complicate corrections later. Keeping records and understanding your statements can save a lot of stress down the road. If this explanation is helping you make sense of the new chart, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps this information reach more seniors who are trying to understand what's happening with their benefits. Timing is another important factor to keep in mind. While the new benefit amounts officially take effect in January 2026, when you actually see the change depends on the type of benefit you receive. SSI recipients will generally see the updated amount at the beginning of the month. Social Security and SSDI beneficiaries will receive their payments according to the standard Wednesday schedule. Comparing December and January payments can be confusing, so it's important to know your exact payment date. Looking ahead, the chart also offers projections for future retirees. It shows estimated benefits based on different claiming ages, giving people a clearer picture of how their decisions today can affect their income later. For those approaching retirement, this information is invaluable. Claiming too early can lock in lower payments for life, while waiting can provide higher monthly income, but only if you can afford to delay. For many seniors, the release of the 2026 chart has been a wake-up call. It highlights how closely retirement security is tied to economic trends and policy decisions. It also underscores how vulnerable fixed-income households are to even small shifts in inflation, taxes, or healthcare costs. A few dollars one way or the other might not seem significant, but over time, those changes add up. At its core, this new Social Security payment chart is more than a government update. It's a snapshot of the financial reality facing millions of Americans. It shows how carefully retirees must plan, monitor their benefits, and adjust their budgets year after year. It also reminds us that staying informed is one of the most powerful tools seniors have. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you again. After seeing how this new chart affects payments, what concerns you most about the year ahead? Is it rising medical costs, housing, taxes, or something else? Leave a comment below. Your experiences help paint a clearer picture of what's really happening across the country. And if you want to stay informed about every Social Security update, payment change, and benefit rule that could affect your income, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. New information is coming, and staying ahead of these changes can make a real difference. Every dollar matters, every update matters, and understanding your benefits helps protect your future.